Good morning, and welcome to the Church of the River here in beautiful downtown Memphis, Tennessee. My name is Sam Teitel, and I serve this congregation as minister. Just one quick announcement before we start this morning. Team Upstream, who are one of these groups at Church of the River who are doing amazing social justice ministry. Team Upstream is in the final push to send postcards to states with a lot of voter suppression happening before the election happens, and they need help with this urgent work. With generous help from donors and volunteers, they have so far raised over $1,000, which will be matched by the Fund for Unitarian Universalist Responsibility, and they've sent over 3,000 cards. The new goal is to send 2,000 cards to registered voters of color in Georgia in September, urging these voters to avoid long lines on Election Day by voting early or dropping off vote-by-mail ballots. If you would like to get involved, send an email to teamupstream@churchoftheriver.org. If you would like to know more about what is going on in the life of our congregation and get more involved, stick around after our service today. There will be information on your screen about how you can get more involved, everything that you need to know. And as always, if you want to stay as up to date as possible on what is going on in the life of our congregation, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Our worship service will now begin. Let's all breathe. We gather, grateful for the bumps in the road, grateful for the trials and tribulations, grateful for the heartbreaks and the headaches, grateful for the moments when we have fallen on our faces, grateful for the moments when we have been picked back up by the people who loved us, grateful for the moments when we have had the opportunity to pick up someone we loved. We gather giving thanks for the moments when we knew that we were loved. Grateful for the moments when we felt love even as we felt so much hurt. Grateful for the moments when nothing could have been enough. Grateful for the moments when what was enough showed up anyways. Grateful for all of the moments in our lives that have led us to this place on this day, that we may come together in worship. We light this chalice for the challenge of freedom, the goal of equality, and the warmth of community. May all who gather here offer and find the blessings of acceptance, loving kindness, and a grateful heart. Amen.
Good morning. Sunday is Grandparents' Day, and we'll be celebrating real grandparents in our community by posting photographs of grandparents in our worship service this week. I love the idea of celebrating grandparents, especially this year because I am in fact a new grandmother myself. But my love of grandparents goes way back, even further than the day I became Sitti, an Arabic word for old lady or grandmother, to Margot and Phoebe. Way back in the day, I'm told that my name was submitted to the local newspaper just for being born. It seems the paper was doing a story about how many generations of one family were living at the same time. At that moment in time, I had 2 grandmothers, 2 grandfathers, 3 great-grandmothers, and 3 great-grandfathers. Can you imagine that? 10 grandparents to celebrate on the same day. Now, I feel really lucky to have known that many of my most recent ancestors. And when I was recalling what I could remember about them this week, I also remembered all the names they had. And this is sort of a funny way to flip the script. Most of the time, parents name their children, but grandchildren get to name their grandparents. So, I was born with 2 mammas, 3 granddaddies, 1 mama say, 1 mommy Scott, 1 ma, 1 pa, and 1 Bob. Now I wonder, what do you call your grandparents? Do you have a special name for them? Maybe you could ask your parents to tell you stories about their grandparents, and you could ask all kinds of questions about what they were called and what they did and what you remember about them. I think that sharing those stories is a great way to honor grandparents and to talk about the roots of your family tree. Those same roots that we sing about when we sing Spirit of Life. Roots hold me close. I'd love to hear your stories, and I hope you'll share them with me over the coming weeks. And what I want you to remember is that whether you're a grandchild or a grandparent, you are beloved, important, and powerful. Happy Grandparents' Day.
So this week is part 2 of the speakers who are giving testimony about what our congregation means to them as part of this year's Canvas. Last week I didn't introduce the Canvas speaker because Chris and I forgot to record it. So last week we heard from Nina and Amelia Eason, 2 members of our youth group who are just amazing young people in our congregation who did a spectacular job. This week, we get to hear from Alexa Bambrick, who has been a member for a good while now. She and her family joined together. She is someone who we first came into contact with through the work that we did in partnership with Friends for Life, and we are so blessed to have her here with us and to have the opportunity to hear her words this morning. So please welcome Alexa Bambrick.
Hi, my name is Alexa Bambrick, and we joined Church of the River last November. Me, my husband Keith, our daughter Willow, Elliot right here, and our now 1-year-old Fiona. We came to Church of the River at a time when we didn't even know that we needed it. Church of the River has meant so much to us. The first sermon I ever heard there was talking about hope, and it was at a time that we were very overwhelmed with life. We had just had our third baby and had just found out that she was visually impaired and would have some challenges that we hadn't encountered before. Having Church of the River as a place of support and a place of peace as we navigated that new challenge was so monumental to us. It was so important and so safe. It was a safe place for us to figure out our feelings, to look for hope, and to be surrounded by like-minded community. We are so proud to have this community as a place for our children to have support and to be loved on by other adults, by people that they can look up to and people that they can confide in. We are Memphis transplants and don't have family local to here, so having a community where our children can feel connected and can thrive and can be around other families who share similar values is so important to us. We are so sad to be missing in-person services, to not get to be physically with the Church of the River community, but we're so grateful that this community is still here and still supporting us and supporting other people, and we just don't know what we would do without it. We're so grateful that we found this community and that we have been welcomed and supported here. So we value Church of the River. We are so proud to be a part of it, and we can't wait to see everybody again when all of this is over.
Our first reading this morning comes to us from George E. Odell. We need one another when we mourn and would be comforted. We need one another when we are in trouble and afraid. We need one another when we are in despair, in temptation, and need to be recalled to our best selves again. We need one another when we would accomplish some great purpose and cannot do it alone. We need one another in the hour of success. When we look for someone to share our triumphs, we need one another in the hour of defeat, when with encouragement we might endure and stand again. We need one another when we come to die and would have gentle hands prepare us for the journey. All our lives we are in need, and others are in need of us.
Our second reading this morning is entitled A Litany for Becoming by Infleshed, and I've adapted their words for our time together this morning. To become is a lifelong process. Nothing is constant, not even the self. We evolve in the midst of narratives meant only for some, and ways of being made narrow by fear and power. We must then have the courage to listen to the truth of our own lives, to the wisdom that comes from within, responding without resistance or need to control, but with welcome and curiosity. This is what ensures our becoming is an unfolding of our truest self. This lifelong labor cannot be carried out alone. It requires help from friends and lovers, family and creaturely companions who bear witness to what makes us come alive and say to us, listen, look, feel, pay attention to that. This is loving and being loved. Telling the stories, sharing in the memories, giving thanks for the relationships, understandings, and experiences past that have shaped us to this day. This is loving and being loved. Celebrating new beginnings that excite, holding risks together, leaning into unknowns with the promises of support and companionship. This is loving and being loved. Listening to the future calling uniquely to each of us in the midst of all of life's noise. Helping one another find our place in the shared labor of collective life. Supporting each other in what it is the world's ache is asking from us. This is loving and being loved. There is no me without you. We shape one another. The sacred that birthed us weaves our lives together so that we can only find ourselves through shared becoming. For my journey and all its winding ways, for yours, for all the saints who labored for what is, all the kin whose lives made ours possible, for all those yet to come for whom living our truths today will mean breaking possibilities open for them tomorrow. We pause. We give thanks. We acknowledge. This is loving and being loved. Spirit of life, knower of the love that lives within us, be with us now and hear our call this morning. We give thanks today for waking, for sleep in our eyes, for sun that warms our faces, for the unknown that another day brings, for the privilege to wonder what comes next. We are in communion with all those that this world has been unkind to, all those in pain, who know suffering like the back of their hands. We recommit ourselves to the work of making the world softer, more gentle and more just for all of us. We ask the universe for another chance at this work of loving, this work of living. We look for new ways to love fully and to live authentically, knowing that we might not get it right, and yet giving ourselves the grace to try again. Amen.
We have reached that point in our service when we will take this morning's offertory. If you would like to contribute to that offertory, there are instructions for how to do so on your screen that you will see shortly. The offertory for the care and sustenance of this congregation and its work will now be graciously given and received.
My grandma Juanita had a business card that she'd made for herself, printed on purple paper. It read, Dr. Juanita D. Sanford, sociologist, consultant, and freelance agitator. I think about that line all the time, freelance agitator, and for some reason it always makes me smile. I can remember asking my parents what that meant and them laughing. So my grandma Juanita and her purple business card were the first images to flash through my mind when I heard about the DIY theme for September. The idea of DIY could not be more appropriate for this time in our lives. As a wise woman told me recently, our lives are all kind of DIY right now to some extent, and a little or a lot messy. The past few months, at least in my experience, have been about a greater familiarity with the unknown, about learning to sit with messy truths, and about reframing or eliminating expectations to align with our current reality. To touch on this slightly, I have to admit that I would really like to be coming to you right now from your beautiful sanctuary. But this is not the year that any of us envisioned, and so I come to you this morning from my Louisiana living room. And yet, the current circumstances also provide an opportunity for us to journey into the unknown together, to reframe expectations, to try something new, to be creative. To DIY, at least for me, is about making it up as you go along, about experimenting, finding what works, and I think it's really important to highlight this part, tossing out what doesn't, accepting that it might take a few tries and a few mistakes to get there. In this way, we're granted a kind of permission, a knowledge that there's no right way and that we get to make our own, to find what works for us. I'm reminded of the freedom of a blank page or canvas. In a way, it's exciting, but it's also scary for the exact same reasons. It brings up this sense of moving forward into newness, not knowing exactly what the finished product will be or what it will look or feel like, to open ourselves to uncertainty, and to do it anyway. As someone who is most comfortable in ambiguity, with many ways of doing the same thing, this is where I thrive. I am a project person, someone who likes to have many different things going on at once, to create and rearrange until it feels right. And embracing the call to ministry is probably the biggest project I have ever taken on in my life. It's also true that I wouldn't be here without the roots that held me tightly when I needed it and helped me to forge new pathways in the dirt when I didn't yet know the way. Grandma Juanita was warm and soft and kind, in a lot of ways exactly the way you would imagine a grandmother. 5 feet tall and smelling of soap and lavender, Juanita would greet us at the door dressed in a purple t-shirt and pants, her white hair piled high on her head, big glasses slipping down her nose. I have vivid memories of visiting my grandparents' house as a child and the disbelief I felt that an adult could have a house where almost everything was purple. I remember holding the bathroom soaps in my hand, amazed at the little purple roses they formed. The walls adorned with quilts hand-sewn by Juanita, and by the door was an altar where she lit candles. Whenever she knew someone was traveling, going through a difficult time, or just needed connection, I remember her saying, "Okay, I'll have my candles going." An acknowledgement that our spirits were held, that she held us close. I want to highlight here that Juanita and I shared no blood relationship, only that of love. When my mom's mother passed away, she and Juanita drew closer, eventually developing a mother-daughter type of relationship. Without question, she and Herman adopted me, my sister, and my brother as their own grandchildren, embodying for me the tendency to DIY relationships, to go her own way, to love those who needed loving. Generational wisdom can come as much from chosen family as it can from our families of origin. And relationships are complicated and complex for all of us, each having their own nuances and texture. Not everyone has grandparents or has the chance to be a grandparent. There is something so special about intergenerational communities like this one, where we can connect and learn from each other. Growing up, I often felt that at church I was surrounded by many grandparents, adults willing to share what they knew and who cared for me, and I'm sure that many of you have felt it too. Whenever we would visit her house, she and my grandpa Herman, their kids, and my parents would share stories, like families do when they're all together. I remember hearing how she took her daughters to hear Dr. King speak in Little Rock, and hearing stories of them holding student meetings, open to anyone, regardless of race, in their living room. Later, Juanita told of her fear for her children when, later that night, a brick shattered their front window. She researched poverty in Arkansas, eventually writing a book entitled Poverty in the Land of Opportunity, a jab at this country that has failed to deliver on its promises to so many for so long. I think now that what she meant by freelance agitator was just the willingness to be annoying, to keep asking the questions, to keep pointing out wrongdoings where she saw them, to keep disrupting systems of injustice, even when it wasn't convenient. Those questions didn't come without struggle or without pain, though. Over time, she began to question the Baptist tradition in which my grandpa Herman was an ordained minister. As the constraints of the role of minister's wife closed in, she latched onto feminism and eventually left the church, feeling that her faith was bigger than any one denomination or eventually religious tradition. Later on, Herman would do the same. I remember hearing her talk with my mom about her chronic illness, about getting older, about her kids, and very often about what might come after this life. These were the kind of questions or conversations I lived for as a child. To know what people thought about who God is, what was hard about their lives, and what they thought might come next. Without even knowing it, she nourished the minister in me. She fed my curiosity. To DIY implies that change is happening constantly, that we are at work building a different kind of worlds. Our reading earlier this morning reminds us that we are beings forever in process, but we are not in that process alone. My grandmother was one in a long line of people encouraging me to look, listen, to pay attention to that. One of my guides to my current path that has led me to stand before you this morning. She saw me when I was just a young girl who loved to read. She sent me books and journals and wrote me letters and told me never to stop reading and writing. She nourished my education and she loved me. There was physical distance between us, but we always visited and I felt close to her. A lot of what I know to be true, I have learned by watching others. I share these tidbits and images of my grandmother's life because in them are pieces of wisdom, passed down to me not explicitly, but there for the taking. The wisdom to hold tight to those you love, to question systems of oppression, and when necessary, authority. The wisdom to pay attention to what lights you up inside, to what makes you feel alive. The wisdom to ask the difficult questions about life, to lean into deep conversations. The wisdom to wonder about what comes next, and the wisdom to love those who need it. I'm not saying that wisdom from those who have come before necessarily makes life easier. But I am saying that on difficult days, when our world feels uncertain, when I'm in the middle of a project and not sure where it's going, I think about what it must have been like for Juanita in South Arkansas in the 1960s, a Baptist minister's wife, discovering feminism and questioning the faith of her childhood, organizing with students for racial justice, working in academia, and raising daughters. I try to feel what that would have felt like in my body. And I remember that she kept going and did it with laughter. She kept organizing and agitating, kept asking the hard questions. And somehow I feel a little more held, a little less alone, a little more rooted, a little more like I can finish the project. To know that others have come before doesn't necessarily make life easier or less painful. But there's some comfort in knowing that across time and death and the space between the stars, we are never really alone. I know that my family's story is not unique and that so many of you have stories like these two that you hold near and dear to your heart. I wonder who you might feel guiding you now, here or from some other place. When my grandmother died in 2016, I wasn't even sure about applying to divinity school yet. But of course I said yes when my mother encouraged me to be a part of the celebration of her life. My hands shook in the pulsing heat of the Arkansas summer as sweat ran down my back. I read, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul." As we stood by her casket, topped with purple flowers, it became clear that she was still teaching me, slowly moving me toward my call to ministry, even from beyond this life. In the coming days and weeks, my mom let me know that what we had done at the graveside was appreciated by her family. They felt it was right, and I heard in that we had honored Juanita in a way that was meaningful for those who loved her, myself included. I began to understand the honor of the work of ministry, and I knew that this was my path. As the prayerful hymn, Spirit of Life goes, roots hold me close. And I wonder this morning, who has held you close? Who has guided you when you didn't know the way? We are endlessly formed and formed again by those who love us into being. Wisdom is passed down from generation to generation as the rivers of time roll onward. I wonder, to whom will you pass all the knowing you hold within you? Who have you taught without realizing it? How have you made pathways in the dirt for those who were unsure of the way? As we go forth from our time together today, let us be nourished by the roots that hold us, even as we journey on into the unknown. Amen.